I should have some interesting countdown theme or something going on there, but I'll work at that. But this is David Rovics with another episode of Discussions with David, which comes to you pretty much in one form or another every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Tuesday, it's actually called Fifth Estate Live, and it has an actual producer who is Peter Werby, the one of the editorial collective members of Fifth Estate Magazine, who is actually who I will be talking to on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And today, for this episode of Discussions with David, which you can also find on my various platforms on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, VK, LinkedIn, and Twitch. And you can also find it broadcast on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance and KBOO Community Radio here in Portland, Oregon. It gets turned into a podcast afterwards if you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, today's guest is a fabulous comedian with a wonderful album out you can find on the music streaming platforms, and also a producer, writer for the Jimmy Dore Show, and has a podcast called Get Your News On with Ron, which comes out every week, and which is also a live stream broadcast, who is my main inspiration for live stream broadcasting, and I'm using the same platforms he told me to use, and then they all work really well. And with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, no, that's a terribly antiquated phrase. People, this is Ron Placone, and it's great to have you on my little show. And it was being on your show, which was on these particular platforms, that I just immediately knew I had to do the same thing with the pandemic. I mean, you'd been doing this sort of thing before the pandemic. I only got into it with when I could no longer tour anymore. But
well, I'm glad you did. I hope you still tour when all this is over as well. But
me too.
I'm glad you did.
I see on your website, as on pretty much every website of every artist I've interviewed since I started doing these shows, that the future tour dates, it says like canceled, to be announced, and otherwise nothing. So,
yeah, pretty much. I mean, we'll announce when we do like virtual events. We'll announce that, like, and sometimes we just tweet it out and stuff like that, because a lot of that is just very informal. Like, people will just sort of, give tickets via Venmo or something like that. So, yeah, interesting times.
Very.
Looking forward to getting back out there.
Yeah, right. And I mean, hopefully eventually, but as you see on any artist website, the upcoming gigs section is usually very prominently featured, because, as we know, that's been bread and butter, to the extent that there is any bread and butter for so many artists. It's in live performing and touring, and now that's not happening. And I mean, it's like there's so many angles to this question that is of particular interest to me. But did you move to LA for the purposes of trying to actually pursue a career in the arts? Like, was that actually why you moved to LA, like so many other people who moved to LA?
No, I moved to LA because the only way I can get horny is in traffic. It's very weird. No, I moved to LA for comedy. I was what we refer to as a road comic for many years, and that just means exactly what it sounds like. I would drive around the country, doing gigs at clubs, and then I did a fair amount of colleges for a while too. That was like pretty much how I made my living. And I'd clock in about 45 weeks a year. Musicians know that grind very well. And I went to LA to kind of try to do something a little more sustainable. It's kind of weird. Everyone says that, oh yeah, you moved to LA to be a star. Like, that's sort of the cliche. But I moved to LA and it was almost the complete opposite. Like, at the time I was a road comic. So, I mean, I was anonymous. No one really knew who I was, but I was on stage every night in front of an audience. And I went to LA assuming I was just going to be an anonymous writer in a room somewhere. Like that was just my thought, that stand up would just be something I did because I love it, and I would just be a writer, which in a way has come true. But I also, ended up working on a couple shows where I was on air. So So yeah, you kind of go to LA and you don't really know exactly what's going to happen. You have a guess on what might happen, and then you just kind of see what doors open up to you, and you roll with it. And with this pandemic, I don't know what the future's going to be exactly. I don't know if LA is going to be what it was. I think in some ways it will still be the same, but I think in other ways it won't. I think writers' rooms, for instance, will be virtual for a very long time. Possibly, like that might be the way it goes from now on. So you're going to have people that they might relocate to other places where maybe they can, have a yard or afford a house or what have you. So yeah, things are changing, and I don't think they'll never go back to quote unquote normal, be it Hollywood or elsewhere. But I'm hoping that the new normal is something better. That's what I'm hoping for.
Because the old normal was actually really not working, right? I mean, in terms
Yeah.
of trying to survive as an artist, I mean, I've just been reading this wonderful, very recently published book called The Death of the Artist. And Bill Deresiewicz, and he was actually from Portland. I'll be interviewing him later this month. But he basically makes the case really eloquently, going through basically each of the different types of arts that we think of, like musicians, visual artists, sculptors, film, theater, and TV, and that's probably leaving a couple major things out there. But as a musician, I'm largely focusing on that. But he says that basically the only industry left that is growing is TV, and everything else, there's no actual work in it. I mean, basically music has been destroyed by essentially by the streaming platforms, not just because of the free internet, but by a very concerted corporate campaign to destroy the music business, and the same kind of way that Uber has destroyed the taxi industry. And what was been so interesting about reading this book is about how he lays out how in each case there have been corporations that have set about to destroy the industry. But TV is another matter, where there's just so much content being produced and so many producers of content. They're all hungry for content, and apparently the pay is about half of what it was 20 years ago. But there's a lot of work. Does that kind of sum up your experience as a comedian in working in TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely a very fair assessment because, I mean, I can use myself as an example. I'm actually not, I've never really done the traditional TV thing, not because I'm have a problem with it. I just found opportunities elsewhere. And I've only been in LA since 2016, so I haven't really been here that long. And I just had more doors open up to me in the podcasting, independent show lane, and took those opportunities and really enjoyed it and still do. So
So
there
Jimmy
are.
Dore has no connection with television. Is not broadcast anywhere on any TV. Okay.
No, I mean Jimmy is and this was before I even became part of it. It was a YouTube show, and it was nationally syndicated on radio, and all those things are still going on. And it was part of the Young Turks network for a long time. It no longer is. Jimmy's completely on his own now. But yeah, Jimmy never really had an actual TV show. I'm pretty sure he could at this point if he wanted to, with how large the show has grown, and I'm pretty certain there's been offers and stuff like that, but he's doing his own thing. So
You talked about when you were touring around before you started staying in one place and doing a lot of work from one city or one area. When you were touring, you talked about 45 weeks out of a 52-week year spending on the road, which I know, of course, for myself and loads of other artists is not so unusual, but it actually this is actually, I think, a relatively recent development, that it's been necessary for a somewhat established independent touring artist of some kind to need to tour 45 out of 52 weeks a year, right? I mean, I remember in my own lifetime only I don't know, 15 to 20 years ago, during that period, I could certainly easily support the family by touring only in the fall and spring, and I would not tour in the winter and summer. And winters and summers were for other things, like producing material and whatever, hanging out with the kids. But well, before I had kids, this was before I had kids. But if I had kids, it would have been time for that.
You
But
would have hung out with them.
I would have hung out with them, but it was like I didn't need to tour all year. I did for a while because I was obsessed with, the activist scene, and I was playing a lot for free. But in terms of like actually doing gigs that they paid well enough that there was certainly no need to be spending 45 weeks out of the year on tour. And I was and not, am not famous by any means, but you just the amount of CDs you'd sell at a typical gig. If you had 100 people at a gig, it would be very typical to sell 20-25 CDs, and the profit on a CD sale was immense, when you consider how much went into they cost $1 to make, when you don't count the recording costs involved of making the album, and then you sell them for 15.
Mm-hmm.
But you've never have you ever had the experience of selling merch at shows, or you got into this after that was a thing? Or
Well, I mean, CDs were kind of phasing out by the time I was hitting the road pretty hard, but CDs were just replaced with T-shirts. So now it's like T-shirts are kind of the lay of the land. And I'll add something real quick here, because this is like, especially when I'm talking to musicians, when you're touring as a comedian and as an unknown comedian, it's a little different, because for me, it's like, I would be brought in by a comedy club, typically as like an opening act. It wasn't quite like an independent musician who will like do their own routing and, are trying to like get on an event with like a more established act, so people are there, or they're, have a little bit of a draw on their own, so they're, doing all their own self-promotion and stuff like that. You're kind of at the mercy, so to speak, of the comedy clubs and the colleges, and the there's a couple agencies where they book a lot of comedy clubs. So you would tell them when you're available and what parts of the country you would ideally like to be in, and they'll tell you what they have available for you to potentially do. And you might be like, hey, I live in Nashville. I lived in Nashville, Tennessee for a couple of years. And they might be like, well, we have this 8-week run in North Dakota in January. And you either say, okay, I'll be there, or you say, I can't do that. I'm going to hold out for something else. And that was the life. So, the 45 weeks a year was probably a little bit different in the sense that it would typically be like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but then you would have like a bunch of nights off. And when I lived in Nashville, that wasn't so bad, because, you're kind of right in the middle of the country. So I would just go home, be at home. And then for a while, I just didn't have a place to live. I was just kind of living out of my car. So whenever I had off days, I would, go to my cousin's place in South Carolina, or I'd go see my parents. They live in Pittsburgh, or, I went to college in the Midwest. So like half my college buddies live in like Indianapolis or Chicago, and that's like an en route to everything. So I've spent a lot of time there, a lot of time on couches. I feel like I unofficially lived in a couple cities, Chicago, Ann Arbor, Michigan. I feel like I unofficially lived in those places, but yeah, so that was kind of the life. So it was a little different than a musician who can like just knock out 6 weeks where they're going on every night, and then just have, like do it in chunks. I'm actually pretty excited, because now I kind of do my own touring, which, I'm thrilled to be able to do that, and hopefully that continues. And so now I can kind of tour the way a band does, or a musician does, where I can just knock it all out and like just do the whole country in like 4 or 5 weeks, and then just be done.
And
with
why
it.
you're able to do that basically because you have another way of paying the rent through working with Jimmy Dore, and so that's more possible, instead of trying to make a living at the touring at the behest of the comedy clubs and the way they tend to organize things. Is it more that the economics of it are different?
It's
because of
both. It's both. The economics are different, but in two different ways. I mean, one, yes, it is different because it's not my only means of income now. I have other means of income, but touring is still a big part of how I make my living. So what's also made it different economically is that now, I can have my own shows, and there's just more people who know who I am now. So instead of just, well, I need to go to a comedy night and people will show up because it's comedy night, it can be, oh, I'm going to come to this venue and people will show up because they know me from the Jimmy Dore show, or they know me from Get Your News On with Ron, and they know me, I tour with another guy, Graham Elwood, who has a similar show to mine, and we tour together. And so, so that has just made it a little more sustainable for me, logistically, and plus it's kind of a lot more fun being able to just sort of do your own thing instead of kind of being at the whim of the comedy club model. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Comedy clubs were essential to me as I was coming up, but now I'm kind of able to do my own thing, and I'm very thankful for that.
And it's basically, as soon as one is in a position where they can do their own thing, that's generally preferable, because right, makes it as nice as it is that the comedy clubs exist. I'm guessing that with them, as well as with similar kinds of outfits in the music scene, the people that get to open, as in, you note the phrase I'm using, the people that get to open for other artists are already like they're privileged to be in that position, or that's the general idea, right? And if they want to actually be making any kind of money, then they're being greedy. I mean, that seems to be the idea when it comes to a lot of people who are organizing or hosting a lot of these kinds of events, and the way they promote the events to comedians and to musicians is like, hey, get on this bill, and then you'll get a bigger audience, and somewhere down the line you might figure out,
bucks.
Yeah, we'll pay you an exposure bucks. Yeah, that's right. Exposure
but
bucks. That's a
David,
great idea.
Let's be fair though. I mean, exposure fed your children for many years, right? You just gave them, exposure, rich in nutrients. They paid you an exposure, kept food on the table for your kids. That exposure food, and your landlord accepts exposure too, right? You just tell your landlord, like, hey, I don't have rent, but I have exposure. I sang a song about you. You actually literally have a song called Landlord. I sang a song for you, so I paid you an exposure. And of course, any landlord was like, thank you so much. So, really, these venues are being too generous to us with all this exposure.
That's right. Chris Chandler would say, when people would say you'll get exposure, he would say, you can die of exposure.
That's awesome. Well, there was that really funny, that Craigslist meme. I don't know if you ever saw it. And who knows if it was actually real or who did. I have a feeling it was real, and then it just went viral. But where somebody had this ad where they were like, we're having a restaurant, and they were like, we want musicians to come here and play, and by the way, we're not going to pay you, but you're going to get exposure. And they were like, we'd like different genres of music, and maybe you could do like some covers, or maybe you can do like some calypso or whatever. And it was like this big ad, and a musician responded, and they go, I'm a musician who want to have some restaurateurs at my house. And I was like, I'm not going to, you've seen that where they're like, I'm not going to pay you, but you're getting exposure for your food. I'd like different types of cuisine, please. So if you could do Indian, Mexican, Italian, like please, I'd like different types of cuisine. And you get exposure. And it's, that was
I love that.
There was a little bit of online justice.
Yeah, that's there was somebody, there's a friend, Matt Callahan, lives in Switzerland, but he's from California. He wrote a book called The Trouble with Music, and he kind of goes through in that book how there's so many people in different positions in the music business who make money, but that just doesn't include the musicians. But there's a lot of other people, or at least there was when he wrote that book. Now, of course, which is, and another point is, like, when we're talking about the comedy circuit, these comedy clubs, or any of this stuff, even before the pandemic, all this stuff was changing so fast all the time, right? As a working musician, trying to figure out how to make a living, how to interface with all the new technology in such a way that it doesn't eat you alive, but you actually can, benefit from it. Because, of course, like, you may not make any money from selling merch, but you get a lot more exposure. And this is, for a lot of artists, that's true. But then what do you do with that exposure? There are ways to monetize that exposure, but I don't think most people are good at that. And now that everybody has to try to monetize their exposure because that's the only way they can make any money, then everybody else is doing it. So it becomes a lot harder. It seems like that that's another thing I've read about, how there's sort of a limited pool. We're finding there's a sort of a limit to all the crowdfunding. There's only so much money out there,
Yeah, no, that's very true. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's not all like it's not all good or all bad. I mean, there's kind of like two sides to every coin. I mean, the internet has certainly, it really screws over artists in terms of streaming, and then you get like the Spotify CEO that condescendingly tells musicians to just make more music, so I can exploit it and give you fractions of pennies. What a great guy! But you
And then
know,
the more music we make, the less money we make per song too, because that's the way the model actually works. So
yeah.
the idea of him telling us to make more music is just, yeah.
Dude, I mean, hey, I Spotify your stuff all the time, David, and I know that I'm giving you fractions of pennies, for it. But like, or that's what you're getting. But
But
yeah, the
that's like,
others.
it's like saying you buy your gas at Exxon. I mean, what else are you going to do?
What
I mean,
else are you
that's,
gonna do? Yeah, like
yeah.
what else are you gonna do? But the other side of it too, though, is the internet has just opened so many lanes for so many people. I mean, before the internet, like, I don't think I would have been able to do something like what I'm doing. Someone who's a comedian being able to tour independently that hasn't had any major TV exposure, that would be unheard of in like the 90s or even in the early mid 2000s. It was just an unheard of thing. But now it's a possibility. I think musicians, it's kind of the same story. I mean, yeah, I think musicians, it's a little more, the art form is a little more, I don't know if established is the right word, but the art form is a little more cemented than comedy. And what I mean by that is that, there's no such thing as a music night, really. Like they'll have comedy night. And it's like, well, gee, there's comedians who talk about politics. There's comedians who talk about all kinds of different stuff. Like, not every comedian is for every general person. Um, but whereas music, it's like you have folk clubs and you have punk clubs and you have, scenes that like a certain type of thing, where a David Rovix knows that, this venue and this promoter and this artist would probably be a good fit for me. They might like what I do. You're not looking to get booked at a classic rock cover band venue,
Mm.
like not to do that. That's been regimented for a long time. Whereas comedy, we're just now starting to kind of reach that point as far as where the contemporary art form is at, where now there are like kind of independent comedy promoters that, like, they're looking for a certain type of thing, and they're looking for, like a comedy that's maybe a little more edgy or against the grain, or has a certain point of view. um whereas a certain type of comic is a good fit for cruise ships or colleges or whatever else. So yeah, and I think the internet really played a role in all of that being a possibility. So,
Because the specialization, the capacity for specialization is endless on the internet, basically. There's always going to be
exactly.
somebody into it. Yeah.
Exactly. And TV is looking for a certain thing. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just a certain thing. There's certain types of comics where, because of the comedy they do, they're never really going to get a chance at mainstream TV. It doesn't mean they're any less funny than anybody else. It just means that's not a good fit for what TV is looking for. TV, you literally need people to stop on a channel. You need them to just stop and keep watching. So the comic that's like super, punchy every 5 seconds is a
Yeah.
good fit for TV, and has maybe a unique look or a unique charisma. That's a good fit for TV. Whereas a comic that maybe they're a little more longer form, maybe they tell stories, maybe they're talking about stuff that, mainstream America may not be as hip to. They're going to have a much harder time getting on TV. It doesn't mean one's better than the other or one's worse than the other. That's just the way it is. So,
But it is
having.
really the way it is. That is, it's such a point to make, though, that the media, the medium we're using, creates or has such a massive impact on the art that people are producing. Obviously, I mean, of course,
Mm-mm.
this was the same in the age of in the feudal times, when if you were going to make a living as an artist, that automatically pretty much meant you had a wealthy patron, right? Then you were painting pictures of rich people most of the time, and that's what you, because that's how you made a living. So I mean, and that, but now it's there's a lot more possibilities, but you're still having to play to the medium that you're working with, and so it tends to encourage. I mean, I remember when you talk about the different types of stuff that TV is looking for, as opposed to what you can do online, it reminds me so much of my years of playing music in the subways in Boston as a street musician, which I did for a living for years in the early '90s. And during rush hour, when the trains were coming by every 30 seconds or every minute or so, the artists that made good money were exactly the ones that you could figure out what they were about within seconds, like because of the way they looked, or their outfit, or their obvious immediate sex appeal, or the fact that they're playing a really unusual looking instrument, or the combination of all those things. But anybody who is like telling a story where you really had to hear the song to kind of get the idea, and to get into it, and you had to follow along for a couple minutes, just those artists like me, you never wanted to play during rush hour. The best time was when the trains were running every 15 minutes, and you had to have a captive audience, and then they might get into it, if
Yeah.
they had to be there anyway.
Well, what you do is not something. I mean, I feel like no music can really be enjoyed passively, but like what you do especially is like something people cannot enjoy passively. Like you have to be engaged with it. You have to really be, listening.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't. I mean, it can be
I mean,
nice as background music, but
if you just played Wagon Wheel over and over again during rush hour, people would stop by and
totally.
but it's like, yeah.
But if it's not rush hour, you got to have two other songs added to your repertoire, at least.
Yeah, yeah, at least two other songs post Wagon Wheel.
Yeah. I knew an artist who would always play Jimi Hendrix's version of All Along the Watchtower, and then he had two other Jimi Hendrix covers Bob Dylan songs, and that was his entire repertoire, was the songs that Jimi Hendrix did that Bob Dylan wrote, and he had found that it was the sweet spot to get those baby boomers to just pour the cash into that guitar case, and it really worked. What's it been like as far as working during the pandemic, though? Have you been actually finding, like, anything new and unusual, interesting happening because of looking for work online during the pandemic? Are you doing any gigs in Ireland or something that you wouldn't otherwise be doing because you didn't travel over there, or any of that kind of strange little?
Not really. I mean, a lot of like the writing stuff hasn't changed. And, like even the stuff with the Jimmy Dore show, I'm not on the show as much because I can't physically be in studio. Really on as much as I was, but I still write for the show as much as I have. So that's all still going. My own show, I've always just run my apartment. So I'm still doing that. That has not changed. In some ways, my life hasn't changed at all. But the big thing, touring, going to different studios, doing stuff in LA, that's all on hold. So in some ways my life has changed drastically, in other ways not at all. There has been some virtual events that have come up. I've even done like a couple virtual colleges this year, which I gotta say, I enjoy doing colleges. I still do. Some comedians don't, never did, but I always have, and I still do. But I didn't hate the fact that I didn't have to get on a plane and then get like either a train or a bus or whatever, because usually college gigs, they're in like small towns, so it's like you fly into the closest place and then you have to get a shuttle, or you have to rent a car to do the campus, all for one night where maybe only 5 or 6 students are going to show up, depending on how well it was or wasn't promoted. I always enjoy it. Like I always enjoy it no matter what, because I've always just had a lot of fun at colleges. But as far as like all of the logistics for one night, I didn't miss that a whole lot. I didn't miss that part. I thought it was kind of cool where it's like, I'm doing Central Michigan University today, but I didn't leave my living room. I'm doing Concord University in West Virginia today, but I didn't leave my living room. I didn't hate that. And I'd be okay if that stuck around, to be honest with you. That being said, it's not quite a substitute for the real live performance. As you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's not quite the same as being in person. I mean, I think the virtual events, they have their place and they can be helpful and useful. I mean, sometimes, I know you tour around the world very, very extensively. I'm just starting to do more worldwide stuff now. I got to Australia last year. I'm hoping to do the UK, once things open back up. But there are some parts of the world that'll be difficult for me to ever really do, or at least some towns in some parts of the world that'll be difficult for me to ever really do. Well, now, folks that I might not be coming to them anytime soon, they can see like a virtual show. So it has its place. Like, I'm not saying that it's all, it has its usefulness, even though it's not quite the same. So yeah, that's kind of how like my work life has been. Everything's been virtual, as opposed to a lot of stuff being virtual. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm looking forward to the world opening up again when it's safe to do so. But in the meantime, I'm just trying to focus on the things I can do instead of on the stuff I can't, for my own like mental sanity.
Yeah, right. But the colleges and the comedy clubs on colleges, they're not just they all just moved onto the internet and actively are organizing events on the internet, or most of them have just stopped?
Some are, some aren't. I mean, for a lot of colleges, it's like they're trying to do everything they can, at least as far as I know. I mean, I don't have, I still have my college agent that I've always had, even though I'm not as active in the college market as I once was. And they kind of just keep me abreast of what's going on and who may or may not want to book me. But which usually when I get college bookings now, it's because someone knows me from the internet. Like someone knows me from Get Your News On with Ron or the Jimmy Dore Show or the Young Turks or something like that.
Yep.
Which in the past, it was just all, promoting via the agency and going to the college event. They're called NACA. It's like the big Association for Campus Activities, where you would go and showcase. Before that was kind of like the grind that I did, which again, I enjoyed it. But now it's kind of more like they know me from something and they reach out to my agent, which is fine by me. As far as I know, like a lot of them, they're trying to keep the students engaged as much as they can. So they're trying to have virtual events, or they'll have like a very socially distanced event where they'll maybe have, like friends of mine who still do a lot of colleges, like they've done a thing where they've had an event on a football field where they're projected and all the students are like seated really far apart, where there's like maybe only 20 or 30 students, but it's in like the football field. So they're all like masked up and socially distanced, and then the person's like projected out. So they're doing stuff like that. As far as comedy clubs, some of the clubs here in LA, and I'm sure other parts of the country are doing it too. I know New York's doing it. They'll do things where they'll do outdoor shows. You'll see some of that kind of stuff, where, it's limited capacity and everyone's masked up and socially distanced. They'll also do things, and I got to do something like this, where there's a very small, spaced out, masked up studio audience, and you could do a stand-up show where you're streaming from the club. So the club is streaming the show. Most patrons are watching online, and you got to buy a ticket to watch it online, but you are physically in the club, and there is a small studio audience. So there is a little bit of laughter, although it's not quite the same because it's, a 200 seat room, and there's about, like 6 or 7 people or however many, spaced out in there. But, I did do that right before the election on October 24th. And I actually even dropped a clip from it. It didn't sound like a typical stand-up routine, but, it was election-centric material. So it was all stuff that I was going to have to cut in a week anyway. So I figured, well, why not just drop it? I mean, people know that the pandemic's going on. This is kind of how stand-up is happening right now. These people are watching online, and there's a handful of people in the room, and that's just it. So I'm just going to drop it. Who cares? You don't hear the laughs the way you would in a full room, but whatever. People know what's happening.
At this point, after so many months of isolation for so many of us, just performing in a venue to 6 people seems so much better than doing the routine from your kitchen, right?
Well, that's the funny part. I got up there and I'm just like, it's really a statement of our time.
Yeah.
This entire day, I have been looking forward to this. And what is this I'm looking forward to? Performing for what I know is going to be an empty room. Like, I know it's going to be. It's not just like, oh, there must have been a Dodgers game. Today was a bust. Like, no, we knew this was going to be an empty room. And I felt like I was getting ready to go headline Madison Square Garden. That's 2020. I was so excited to perform for an empty room. I also did a show at a baseball stadium And where it's like they projected. Well, they didn't project. They did like you know, they'll have those like loges like outdoor, or maybe the loge is not the right word for it, but you know what I mean, where it's like there's like an area where they might have like venues and stuff like restaurants in like a
Little
sports
village
stadium.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. They had a comedy show and everyone was like spaced like at least 12 feet apart, and everyone was wearing a mask, and there was literally a baseball scrimmage game going on, and we did a comedy show, and it's just so funny because like we were so freaking happy to
Yep.
be there. Like we felt like we felt like we had all just walked on water. And it's like a year ago, this would have been a hell gig.
Yeah.
It was a 2-hour drive from my house for $20 in a free meal and 2 drink tickets. You know,
To get ignored by a baseball team.
yeah, there were actually people there watching the show.
So okay.
But there was a baseball game going on, and they, of course, yeah, they were ignoring it. But yeah, I mean, it was just like a year ago, or even like 8 months ago, I would have said no, thank you, really fast to that gig. I'd be like, no, thanks.
Yeah.
I don't need. But I said yes to it before I even heard the details. Oh my God, yes.
Right.
Please.
There's going to be a microphone, really?
Yeah, right. There's going to be breathing bodies that are physically there. So I think in a lot of ways, I'd like to think I never really took stand up for granted because I love it to death. And even the bad sets, you know, you kind of, wipe it off your shoulder and live to fight another day. But I really hope that I feel like I will never, ever take this remotely for granted ever again. And I'm sure you feel the same. And I feel like whenever touring does come back, whether it's in 2021 or it might not even be till 2022, I hope it's 2021, but we'll see. But whenever it does come back, I'll be there. And also I can promise, I know it's a cliche, but I do mean it from the bottom of my heart. I will treat every show like it's going to be my freaking last, because it might be. So I can promise anyone who, is excited to see me when all this is over, you're going to get 120% every freaking time. That's a promise.
For all the bad sides of the whole situation, there's so many of the small things in life that we've all, many of us have learned to appreciate so much more because we took it for granted before, like things like you could be in a room full of people.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, that is like the other side to it. And, there's also, I'm sure you've really appreciated all the time the family, with the kids especially and stuff like that. And, some of my friends, they're at the point where they're having kids, and so in a way it's like I feel like that's a blessing. I feel the idea of bringing a kid into this world is terrifying to me, but if you're gonna do it, I think it's kind of a blessing that, well, you're not gonna miss anything, right? Like you're gonna just be there. So in a way, if you have kids that are like school age, it's a really big bummer, because I'm sure it breaks your heart to see them miss out on so much. But like if you just have infants and stuff like that, like, man,
then it's a great time.
It's a great
if you got
time.
a way
Like,
to survive, at least
miss a minute. Well, that's the other side of it.
As long as you got away. I mean, I'm so much my youngest of my 3 kids. My youngest is the 1-year-old who has never had to live through me going away for a big tour in her life. It's a totally different relationship than I had with the other babies because of that. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, totally. I can imagine.
As a writer of topical songs that have a oftentimes short shelf life, to me, like the idea of constantly producing new material, because that's what I do, is no big deal. But I imagine a lot of in the comedy world that is probably a constant pressure that I've heard, is that if once you have material, it basically it gets old really quickly. As soon as people have heard the jokes, they're not funny anymore until people forget them, and or they might not have good shelf life if they're about politics from last week, and nobody's going to remember who Joe Biden was in a few years. But what can you talk? And another, this is not really related, but another thing I wanted to ask about was this: as a as a musician who has done recording, working with producers and engineers and other musicians, like I realize how much is involved with making good music, and it's the same with any kind of art form. That it's not just about the sort of so-called artist or the one that people are actually looking at. As you know, in your position as a writer, how important the whole team is to making anything happen. Like every time I hear a hit on the pop radio, you can hear the role of the producer in that hit being a hit, and that the artist may be brilliant, but this song would not be a hit if some producer hadn't agonized over that keyboard sound and finding something that was really just a little bit different from anything that anybody had done on a keyboard up until this song. I mean, you could just hear the agony that went into each note trying to make it sound not quite like that hit from last week. But what can you talk about any of that that I just went on about, which is not all related to each other, but
Yeah, I mean, it's a different process. I mean, fine tuning a joke is, you have to do it in front of an audience. Like you have to perform, find out where the beats are, what's missing, and it really is a process. It's different than being in a studio and tweaking stuff and finding that right keyboard sound, but it's notably similar. Like, because that keyboard sound might be like, oh, I had too many words before this punchline, and that threw everything off. Oh, I found out that that saying beer instead of Sam Adams works better. Like it makes it more universal. And I was being too niche and didn't realize it. I mean, just little things. And, like some you'll just find out that there were just the smallest, most minuscule things that kept a joke from working. I mean, and there were bits where it's like, I thought I had a funny idea and it just landed flat completely. And then I just like made a few adjustments and it became the bits I've ever had. Other times you just realize that no, that was just a miss. That just wasn't connecting. Other times you just write a joke like that and you got a hit. So, it's a similar process. I mean, it is different in the mechanics of it, but it's a very similar thing. And it's coming out with like a new hour of comedy a year, which is typically what a lot of comics do. They try to pump out an album every other year, and even if they're not going to pump out an album, they still want to have a pretty new a new set. Like they don't want to do the same jokes because the people who saw you last year might come to see you this year, and if you do the same act in front of them, they're not going to be happy, and reasonably so. So yeah, you really try to mix it up, and I like it. I mean, I like doing topical material. I always have. So like you have to cut that stuff and get new stuff. But I like that process. And, it's one of those things where, and I think this circles back to how the internet can be, in many ways a godsend, where it's like a lot of the stuff I talk about and a lot of the stuff that I write about and write about, cable TV would never ever air that. I mean, hey, these are all corporately entities. They're not gonna like a joke about NBC being owned by Comcast, and that's why they won't give an honest story on net neutrality. They're not gonna want to joke about U.S. imperialism. They're not gonna want to joke about how the duopoly is corrupt as a whole, and it's not just the Republicans are bad, but the Democrats are the good guys. No, they're both bad guys. And it's a systemic problem because they're both owned by Wall Street. That joke's not going to fly on late night. But there are lanes for those jokes. There are vehicles for those jokes. There are audiences for those jokes. And, if it weren't for the internet, I don't know if that would be the case. I mean, comedians that have gone against the grain in the past, they were able to find lanes. But, it's always traditionally been very hard. I think if Bill Hicks had survived, he would have gotten a talk show, but it would have been in London. It wouldn't have been in the US. So, in some ways that has continued to this day. But, because of the internet, there's just more platforms for different types of people that have different points of views and different perspectives on things. And, I'm really thankful for that.
Have you found that, I mean, since Trump got elected, I have been told by so many people, oh, you must be having a great time as a writer. You must be, having loads of material. And I mean, it's not that I haven't been able to deal with his presidency as far as writing goes. And certainly I've found a lot in the pandemic, to write about because of so much that's been going on. But I don't know if I don't necessarily think that having a sort of fascist in the White House necessarily makes our lives easier as writers. And there's a lot of minefields involved with trying to write about this stuff, and a lot of like pitfalls. Like once if you're criticizing him, are you implicitly understood to be saying nice things about the Democrats because of
Right.
the duopoly in people's minds? There's nothing to the left of the Democrats. Do you have you had a real hard time trying to walk that line with Trump being in the White House and making jokes about things that are so serious for so many people?
I haven't, because yeah, of course I've had people like, oh man, Trump must be great for material. And I just kind of, I just kind of laugh and I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, why? Because I'm not
Yeah.
gonna like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna like. I mean, those people are usually just like family members or people who don't really pay attention to politics, and they're just well intentioned. Like I don't need to, like I don't need to get on a soapbox and start
Yeah.
lecturing them.
Start talking shop. Yeah.
but but to me, it's like, I mean, Trump jokes got old pretty fast. So if you were going to talk about Trump, which of course I talk about, he's the president. How do you not talk about the president? But I mean, I've always tried to do it in a way where it's like systemic. Instead of talking about Trump, I like talking about what led to Trump. I like talking about like how a person like Trump became president, what it really means, and what it would mean if we got a more competent Trump, how destructive they would be, and what it really says about our system. There's a lot of humor in that. The humor in the fact that they could barely beat this guy. I mean, it looks like, look at what's going on right now, and people saying, hey, everything's fine. Look at what happened. It's like, well, what did we really learn? You know what we learned, David, over the past 4 years? If the Democrat opponent is a pedophile, or B, somebody who had a once in a century pandemic happen and mishandled it every step of the way and can't denounce white supremacy. If your opponent is one of those two things, you might be able to narrowly pull a victory. How insanely uninspiring is that? That's ridiculous. But that's our duopoly. That's how it's working. And then you have someone like a Bernie Sanders who's actually just speaking the people's language. He wasn't, cracking some Rubik's Cube. He was just offering people solutions that would make their lives better. And by the way, none of these policies are anything he invented. They're things that a lot of people in other countries take for granted. They're things people in Canada take for granted. People in Denmark take for granted. People in England, to an extent. I know Boris Johnson isn't doing the greatest over there, but they take it for granted. So yeah, I mean, for me, the system has always fascinated me way more than just whatever puppet is occupying the White House. And of course that took years of growth and development. I always wanted to talk about politics. But when I was first starting out, I didn't really know how to hone the types of jokes that went deeper. So when I was first starting out, I would, do a joke about how George W. Bush, fumbles his words all the time and think that I was, that's biting. Like, no, it's not. No, it's not. But it's like, you got to grow and you got to learn how to communicate those ideas via a punchline. I had those ideas, but I didn't know how to put them into punchlines yet. So as the years have gone by, I've gotten better. At least I hope so. I've gotten better at putting those thoughts into punchlines. And so to me, like, that's always been the craft. So, to me, it's not, I mean, either one of those, whoever occupies the White House, I'm not a fan. So, either one of those guys, there's going to be plenty for me to write about and plenty for me to talk about. And it's always been that way. And I don't see that ever changing.
But speaking about word fumbling, it's really remarkable how Biden's inability to complete a sentence without slurring together words, because he does speak English. He is a native speaker of the English language, and anybody who has learned how to speak their own language, presumably, and especially like somebody like him, he's gone to college and stuff. Like he probably, he's well aware that there is a separation between each of these words, and if he wanted to enunciate, he could, have a little bit of separation between each word. I mean, everybody learns how to do that, right? It's if you go to school and I mean, I don't understand how somebody gets to that level without being able to actually give a speech where each word is enunciated. And he lived for 8 years. He was Obama's vice president, and every speech Obama gave, he enunciated every word. It's just kind of bizarre to me, but it also reminds me of how people are feeding him these lines and he can't even deliver them. And he's got a wonderful team of people probably coming up with all kinds of great lines. And actually that Black Eyed Peas video where they took one of his speeches and cut it up so that the delivery was better and the timing was good, and they put lots of spaces and music in it, and it was powerful. It's like, wow, whoever wrote this speech, that was a great speech that he royally completely fucked up to the point where it had no emotional impact. It was one of the speeches he gave during one of those debates, whereas you could only tell from the Black Eyed Peas video that it actually was a well-written speech, because but I'm also reminded of some of Stephen Colbert's stuff. Like he's given this great stuff, and this half the time he doesn't deliver the jokes well enough. Like you could just hear his writers cringing in the back room, I imagine, thinking, gosh, I really worked hard at that joke that you just totally fucked up. But Jimmy Dore, on the other hand, I mean, I just have to say, having just listened to the most recent show, and I heard him saying a bunch of stuff that you just said too, but his delivery is like it's off the top of his head. I was very impressed with the delivery. That's you wouldn't know that he's got a bunch of writers working for him.
Yeah, I mean, no, I am. So when I hear some of the late night hosts, I think, man, I'm glad I write for somebody who I can trust my material in their hands.
Right.
And Jimmy and I have been, I mean, we've kind of. It's been a couple years now that I've really been writing for him, and he was the first person I ever really wrote for, and and it was just a very good match. I mean, the type of comedy he's doing, and the type of topics he does, and the type of stuff that we're both passionate about, it's been a very good fit. So I'm really lucky for it. And I mean, the first time I heard him deliver something I wrote, it's a lot of comedians will say this. It is a surreal experience. There's a very special experience when you hear somebody deliver a joke that you wrote, and you hear like a sold out audience cheer for it. It's a special thing, and it still is. And yeah, I like that I can I can have that confidence of like he's gonna. Like this is gonna go. I mean, sometimes during the live shows, after a few martinis, he'll do something, and I'll be like, "That's not how I wrote it. He screwed that up." But
yeah, sure.
So it does happen. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely nice to be able to have that. And yeah, it's funny. I'll tell a quick goofy little anecdote on that. One time I saw when I used to be on panel during the live shows, because you would have like a microphone in your hand. Whenever I would agree with something or want to react to something, instead of clapping, I would my fingers, and I looked kind of goofy doing it, admittedly. Like it did look kind of dumb, but I remember one time during a live show, I saw comments it was a clip later, right, on YouTube, and I read some of the comments, and this person was writing out the jokes, and they were saying how much they enjoyed them, and all the jokes were jokes that I had written. Like they wrote out this one joke and they were like, "That's hilarious." And they wrote out another joke and they were like, "That's even funnier." And they wrote out a third joke and they were all my jokes. And I felt like so cool. I was like, man, this person like quoted 3 of my jokes and said how much they liked them. And then there was a fourth comment from that same user and they were like, "Who's this ginger asshole snapping his fingers?"
I love it.
So, sometimes you're the guy behind the scenes. It happens.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, with some people, like, I mean, I love Colbert. I don't mean to harp on him, but sometimes he'll be delivering a joke coming from one of his writers, and it just sounds like he hated the joke in the first place, and he like, why is he doing it? Like you can tell, like he's doing the joke and he's like totally not doing it any justice, and you're just you're wondering like why did he just even take this? Why didn't he just throw it out? Was there a shortage of jokes and he just had to take ones he didn't like too? I mean, I don't know.
Well,
It's
my personal take on him is I really miss that character that he used to do.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I think first of all, he has some takes on the U.S. that I don't really agree with, especially when it comes to foreign policy and stuff like that. Like when you hear a late night comedian say stuff like, "Well, the U.S. is a force for good around the world in terms of the stuff we do," like that's.
Oh, I didn't know he said that. Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna like, but yeah, I mean, he's had some pretty kind of bad takes, and it's kind of like I miss the character, and I know that thing that he did where he just like went off the cuff, that everyone's like, oh, he just went off the cuff and he went from the heart. It sounded like, first of all, there was not a punchline in sight. Not that there's anything wrong with occasional moments of sincerity, but it was just like kind of like, what's your point? Like he would like, oh, the office of the presidency is sacred, and I was like, is it? I think we should
Really?
abolish it. I don't think it's sacred.
Let's have
Like
a collective.
yeah, right. So you know, stuff like that. In fact, I even tweeted out, I was just like, guys, he's gonna do his conservative character again. I'm so happy. It's his conservative character. It's back. It's not as punchy as it needs to be, but it's probably rusty. It's been years. But yeah, I mean, that was a guy who oh, my cat's excited. That was a guy who, like, when he was doing his character, and you know, I mean, I felt like Stewart and Colbert, you know, they kind of, in some ways, they went as far as that type of medium would let them. You know what I mean? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
like, look, when you're on a corporate network, there's only so far you can push it. And I felt like at times that they pushed it as far as they potentially could. Maybe not all the time, but I felt like they did. Now I don't feel that way about Colbert. I mean, Stewart, you know, he retired, so you know, I can't say anything about him one way or another. But Colbert, it's like he's not doing that anymore, and I feel like he could if he wanted to. It's just not what he wants to do, I guess. Lucy may or may not agree.
What do you think, Kat?
But yeah, I mean, like in 2012, he was making jokes about Obama being too conservative in 2012. I mean, Colbert had that joke where he's like, man, there's so many, you know, right wingers in the Republican primary. It looks like the only moderate Republican is going to be Barack Obama. That was a Colbert joke. That was a joke on the Colbert show. He's not doing those kind of jokes. Yeah, he's not doing those kind of jokes anymore. And I think it's one of those things when you have something like Trump, a lot of people respond in different ways. Some people respond as, this is what our system is. This is the result of our system. This is the result of, you know, the corporate capture of our government, the, you know, endless power of Wall Street, and what the duopoly really is. Other people respond as, oh, we better not touch the other part of the duopoly. It's Trump is this anomaly. Everything bad started in January of 2017. And, you know, I agree with the first take and not the second one. To me, it's like, no, Trump's the result of our system. He's the result
Absolutely.
of our system. And, you know, even if, I mean, it looks like Biden's going to win here, but, you know, things are just getting started. Biden is, you know, you can't replace a neo-fascist with a neocon and think that everything is okay.
It was the neocons that brought us the neo-fascists, so we can just have another round, see what happens next time around.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, hey, man, I'm a human being. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm not happy a little bit to see Trump lose. Of course I am. I'm happy to see Trump go away. Who isn't? But I'm not going to be happy to see Biden become president. It's still a president in the wrong direction. I was a big optimist for a couple of days, David. I was thinking, you know, if we just abolish the freaking presidency and have a people's legislature, then it's a win-win. You get to watch Trump lose. That's nice. Who's not happy about that? And you don't have to see Biden become president. Everybody freaking wins. But, you know, that's not happening here. But, you know, I think that hopefully going forward, people realize that, you know, the work is not done. There's still a long way to go. And, you know, you can't just put a neocon in office and think everything's okay. And I look forward to making those jokes. And now when I make those jokes, you know, people who disagree won't be able to call me a closeted Trump supporter or whatever other, bogus insult they're going to try to come up with. They'll have to come up with something new because Trump will be gone.
Yeah, I get tired of being called a Trump supporter too.
They even say
It's
it
so
about
bizarre. Anytime you say something negative about the Democrats, there are people who will say, "Oh, you sound like Trump." Like, oh my God,
You
really?
know what, David? In a way, I blame comic books. In a way, I blame American comic books because, we're raised on, we live in a society where you're really raised that there is an A and there's a B, there is a good guy and a bad guy. And sometimes when your message is, there's only bad guys here, that's not, people don't know how to take it. It's not
Well,
that
I
they
would,
necessarily.
as a fan of Marvel Comics, I would have to say you're talking about DC.
Well, no, I mean, I love comics too. Don't get me wrong. Like don't take that like too.
But DC is
literally,
like
but
that. Yeah, there's the good guys and the bad guys generally. I mean, it's
yeah,
getting them a little more evolved. I love the Joker, the movie, but the old stuff from DC, it was always like Batman was on the side of the cops, and the criminals all looked ugly and talked weird, and they were, I mean, Marvel's much more complex. The X-Men are on the
Marvel took
side
it
of,
further. Yeah,
yeah.
Marvel took it further, but all of them, because there was that clause that came out after the Cold War, right? Like there was that clause that came out, and I forget the name of it. A lot of people know it by heart, and I always forget the name of it, even though I mentioned it. But there was that clause that came out after the Cold War where it's like all of this, there has to be a certain nationalistic, patriotic element to comic books. And that's sort of been the lay of the land ever since. So a lot of the comic books that really go against that grain, they kind of like stayed underground in the United States. And in other countries, comics are a little more universally edgy, I guess. But, they had that clause here in the United States that DC really parroted and Marvel to an extent. But yeah, so it's like, and don't get me wrong, I still love a lot of those comic books anyway. But yeah, there's a good guy, there's a bad guy, there's an agenda, and the world is a bit more complex than that. Yes, Trump is a bad guy, but our intelligence agencies are bad guys too. The plutocrats of the world are bad guys too. Even if they don't like Trump, hey, Jeff Bezos doesn't like Trump, he's still a bad guy, and he doesn't like him for the wrong reasons. It's not that he doesn't like him because he's, an oligarch. He's an oligarch too. He doesn't like him because they just want to have a big measuring contest. That's what it's all about. He still got to take advantage of that tax break. So, sometimes when that's your message, it's a little more of a bitter pill to swallow. But, a lot of people, they want to hear those perspectives. They want to listen to songs that emphasize how they're feeling. They want to hear jokes that emphasize how they're feeling. And that's where folks like you and I come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Here. Ron, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for spending the hour with me.
Always a pleasure, David. And I love what you do a bunch. And I look forward to us both going forward. Thanks so much for having me. Folks can find me on Twitter at Ron Placone. RonPlacone.com is my website where you can find everything I do, my webcomic, my show, and everything else. And peace, everybody.
And everybody needs to hear that album, Agnostic Holiday. Fantastic stuff. You can find it on all the streaming platforms.
Thank you.
If you're feeling depressed, just, go to Spotify. You'll feel better soon.
Right on.
Take care, Ron.
Cheers.
Cheers. And thank you, everybody, for joining in on this discussion with Ron Placone. And I will be back live streaming more interviews with folks on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week, as with most weeks. And on Tuesday, I'll be talking with Peter Werby from the editorial collective of Fifth Estate Magazine. And remember, don't pay the rent. Mutual aid will get us through. Trust your neighbors. And I will see you soon. I'm doing a concert on the last Saturday of every month, too, right here on most of these platforms at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And maybe by the time I'm back, we'll know who the next corrupt politician in the White House will be. Until soon, take care. Bye for now.